Sean's good recording. Oh, all right. Thank you for coming, everybody. Welcome. My name's John Reiner. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the town, and we welcome you to our kickoff meeting looking at resiliency and sustainability in downtown Mystic on the Groton side of things. A couple housekeeping items. We're talking into the mics, not for a PA system in here, and I should be doing it myself for the introduction for the recording that's happening there. It is on if it's red. Exits there and that door there. There's a bathroom right behind Mr. Paul Bates there if he waves his hand. In that back corner, there's also one up those stairs over there behind Greg Hanover, our Director of Public Works. So Megan Granato is going to go through a presentation. We also have Deb Jones here, our Assistant Director of Planning and Development, Greg Hanover, our Director of Public Works, and then our consultants here, both Sam and Wayne from GZA, and Megan can wave her hand and introduce herself. So thanks for coming. I'm going to hand it off to her, and we look forward to your participation and hearing from you tonight.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction. So welcome. This is our very first public workshop for the Downtown Mystic Sustainability and Resiliency Plan. And first and foremost, echoing what John just said, thank you. Thank you for coming out. This was a fantastic turnout. We are so excited that you're here spending your time with us. We know there's a lot of things. You can't hear me?
I don't think it's on. No, the mic is only for the recording. It's not a PA, so we'll just have to talk a little louder.
I'll yell.
And Megan, if you want, maybe come on.
Sure. I'll stand on this side since no one took up the first row option of seating here. So we know that you had a lot of things you could be doing with your time this evening. Thank you for coming and spending it with us. We very much appreciate it. Please do not be shy. There's snacks. I won't be distracted if you come get a snack. Seriously, please enjoy. Make yourself comfortable. And again, thank you. So a little breakdown of how we're going to be spending our time together tonight. I'll continue with the introductions, and then I'm going to present some slides providing an overview of the project, the ins and outs of what it's all about. Then we're going to be doing small group discussions so we can hear more about your experience with flooding and other climate impacts in the study area. From there, we'll hand it over to Sam to talk about next steps, and we'll wrap up by 6:30. So continuing on the introductions again, I am Megan. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Sustainability and Resilience Manager for the Town of Groton. I've been here about 2 to 3 months, so I'm excited. This is the first time I'm getting to actually do a public meeting, and so I'm really excited to talk to you all tonight. You just heard from John. We also have Deb, who's here. There she is. Sorry, I couldn't see behind Sean. And then GZA GeoEnvironmental is our consultant team for this project. And here we have Sam Bell, who is a senior resiliency planner with GZA. Sam, if you could wave. You'll be hearing from him in a little bit. We have Wayne Cobley, who's Vice President Client Services. And David Leone, Associate Principal, is working with us on this project. Wasn't able to join us tonight, but we appreciate all of his input. We also have a fantastic steering committee for this project. So our steering committee is meeting with us throughout the project duration to give input and advice, bring in resources, ask good questions, and we really appreciate all of their inputs. They're listed here, not in any particular order, but I'll run through the names, and if you could wave your hand, I'd appreciate it. First, we have Dr. Frank Bolin, UConn Marine Sciences Professor Emeritus. He is also representative of the Groton Resiliency and Sustainability Task Force. Thank you, Frank. We have Jim O'Donnell, Executive Director of Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation, also known as CIRCA. I'm not sure if Jim's with us tonight. We have Chad Frost, Principal with Kent and Frost Landscape Architecture. We also have Todd Brady, who I know is here, Managing Director of Coastal Funding Co. LLC and representing the Groton Historic Districts Commission. And then we have additional colleagues from the Town of Groton. We have Mark Berry, our Director of Parks and Rec. We have Greg Hanover, Director of Public Works, who's right over there. Captain James B., Director of Emergency Management. and Delia Morrison, who is our acting finance director. So we were hoping to learn a little bit about you all who are spending your time with us here this evening. Since most people have smartphones, we actually set up an online poll that you can access two ways. You can either go to that address shown at the top, or you can actually text that code to a certain number, and if it's not just working, we can do it the old-fashioned way and raise hands. That's fine too. But folks want to give it a try? Sure. The first question asks about your relationship to the study area. So if you live in Mystic, if you work in Mystic, if you're someone who visits Mystic.
So you can text Wayne, WAYNECOBLEIGH 230. So is the number 22333?
Text that as the message to number 22333.
Yes.
And your phone will automatically put the 22333 in an order.
You got it. All right. We have one person successfully in. Two people successfully in.
So if you text, 22333 is a number.
As if you were texting a phone number 22333. Did you get a link to the poll, and then I'll activate the poll question? It's all right. It's okay, because it'll be on the first question, too.
What's it called, Lee? Is L-E-I-G-H or C-H?
L-E-I-G-H.
Charlie, C, not G.
G.
G, George.
G is in George. G is in GZA.
I think GZA. Maybe it doesn't work.
So this is the first question that should come up on your smartphone, and all you have to do is vote with a number. You pick as many as you want that apply to you personally, and as you're answering, we'll see how many of you live here, work here, visit here. And the ID number again is at the top of the slide.
Is it cap sensitive?
Sure. So you can.
Put in the phone number that you're going to text to as 22333. Okay, as if you're sending a message to 22333. Once you've done that, your message is Wayne Cobley 230. Wayne what? Cobley, my last name.
You got that, but
All one word. So it's W-A-Y-N-E.
we got that. What's the number? 3223.
C-O-B-L-E-I-G-H 230.
22333. And it doesn't matter that it puts little hyphens in the number. That's okay.
Two twos and then followed by 3 3s.
We should have like the Jeopardy music playing.
It's playing in my head.
Somebody must own a business in Mystic this year. Come on.
Moving right
There we
along.
go.
That's the phone number?
How's that, a little better?
That's better. Does anybody need help?
What messages? Oh, I see, you're gonna do this.
Now do 2, 3.
I got you. 2, 2, 3, 3.
And then change the message.
The message went away.
Message from Wayne, Telephone Season, speak to
Go to messages. Go to
For now, don't close it.
So now what?
Yeah, now hit that. Now it's not allowing us to be joined. Yeah. It's not joining. I didn't get there because it says join presentation and it won't let me join. It says presenter not found.
I didn't even get that.
All right, so this is a little bit of an experiment for us, so maybe we'll just kind of move on.
That's it. He gets my vote.
I think from here we'll do it the old-fashioned way. Or raising hands.
So folks, I think this is a little bit
Yeah, we can do raising hands.
trying this, so I think we got a little
To
bit
the
of
side, but I think it
participation
is.
rate, but it's a little funky, so I think we'll move on from this. Maybe we'll do it the old-fashioned way, so raising a hand.
I think that sounds good. So thank you for your patience. Like John said, thought we'd try something new. Little hiccups. But the first question, so if you could just raise your hand, and you can raise your hand more than once, who here lives in downtown Mystic? Okay, good a number of people. Oh, sure. Yeah.
That looks about right, 25%.
Yep. Okay, how about folks who work in downtown Mystic? Okay, only a couple. People that don't live or work there but visit downtown Mystic, right? So that's me. So most folks in the room. It looks like at least one person owns a business in downtown Mystic. Okay. Who here owns a home in downtown Mystic? Okay, handful of people.
Didn't get
Okay.
through. Some of you didn't get through?
And we'll put these polls up online too, after this. There'll be some things on Greater Groton.
Okay. And the next question, if Wayne, you might as well still advance it if you can. We will not do on the poll, we'll just raise hands. Is we're just trying to gain a feel for how long people have been working or living and visiting Mystic. So anyone have lived, worked, or visited in downtown Mystic for less than a year? All right, welcome. 1 to 5 years. Okay, couple of folks, 5 to 10. Excellent, more than 10 years. Okay, this is great. This is excellent. That's very valuable for us to know, so thank you. Okay, so I think we're back to slides. Wayne, if you could make that switch.
Sometimes technology works great, other times it doesn't. Maybe we won't use this platform again, but thanks for helping us with that experiment. We're always trying to find new ways of getting some interactive information.
Exactly. Last piece is our housekeeping for us is a very important piece. This is our funding acknowledgement. The Town of Groton received funding to support this work from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation through the Long Island Sound's Futures Fund grant program. We are very, very appreciative of their support because it's made all of this possible. And so wanted to recognize them. And then there is a disclaimer that anything we say today is our opinion only, not reflecting the federal government. Okay, so let's actually get into talking about the project itself. So as you could probably guess from the title, the entire purpose of this project is to develop a resiliency and sustainability plan for downtown Mystic as an important first step, and then, implementing projects to make Mystic more sustainable. The study area is shown in red, and I know that's kind of small on the screen. We do have a website for this project that I'll be showing later on that you can access and see it much, much larger. Sustainability and resiliency are big words that people use in a lot of different ways, so I wanted to kind of break down how we are applying them here. So when we say resiliency, we're talking about the ability to withstand risks and negative impacts, which is sort of similar to being able to bounce back after having something, negative happen. And specifically with this project, when we're talking about risks and negative impacts, we're talking about those related to climate change. Sustainability then is making decisions today with an eye towards the future. So how are we making decisions today that are going to impact the study area for future generations? This is the first study of its kind that the town has embarked on. And so some folks might ask, well, why are we starting with Mystic? And there's a number of reasons why. Mystic is no stranger to flooding, being a coastal town built right on the river, partially in that river's floodplain, right? So we have a long history of flooding in Mystic. Mystic is also fairly densely populated, especially compared to other parts of the town. So you have a lot of people that call Mystic home, a lot of people that work in Mystic. It's also a major tourist attraction. So it's part of the economic driver of the town, and it's also a historic district. And I think about two aspects of that. The first is that a lot of the buildings in Mystic were built a long time ago. The streets were built a long time ago. The systems were also built a long time ago. So we have stormwater systems, for example, that were built much before today's current standards. With historic buildings as well, there's different processes that apply for how to do work on those buildings, like flood mitigation projects. So it's just something else that we need to keep in mind as we're going to be working through this project. So I mentioned before that we are focused on climate hazards, and we have sort of binned them into three main groups. The first being sea level rise, storm surge, and coastal flooding, and the associated impacts on coastal erosion. The second is extreme precipitation and its resulting causing of stormwater flooding and riparian or riverine flooding. And the third being heat. So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to be showing projections for each of these hazards in the study area to give you a good idea of what the planning team is going to be folding into all of our work, thinking again about how to make Mystic more resilient. So the first I wanted to talk about is sea level rise. And I'll see if I can get closer to the screen and actually use the laser pointer. So the advice from CIRCA, the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation, is that we plan for 20 inches of sea level rise by the year 2050. So that's almost 2 feet. CIRCA has a really fantastic online mapper that I took these images from. So it allows you to search for locations and then toggle between different scenarios of sea level rise and storm surge. So this image on the left shows our study area with 20 inches of sea level rise. The yellow blobs are just low-lying area. The blue, light blue areas, oh no, I pressed the wrong button. There we go. Okay, so see here, these light blue areas. I know it's kind of challenging on the screen, but we will be uploading these onto the website. These are areas that essentially are going to be inundated with 20 inches of sea level rise. So you see here right along the coast, right along the river, we have infrastructure that's going to be impacted. This story gets a bit different if you look at the second image, this one over here, which is again 20 inches of sea level rise, but with a 100-year storm on top of it. So a 100-year storm is a storm that has, on average, a 1% chance of happening in any given year, although those odds are also changing with climate change, right? So looking at 20 inches plus a 100-year storm, now we're seeing far more infrastructure at risk. So this right here where my cursor is Pearl Street. So we're seeing flooding essentially through the floodplain up to the escarpments, far more buildings, roads, critical infrastructure that's going to be impacted. But it's not just large storms that we have to plan for. We also need to look at just the impacts of high tide flooding on a daily basis. And this image has a lot of variables and parts on it. I'm going to try to walk through it. I will say also to give credit, this is from the Climate Explorer Toolkit, which is another really great online tool that you can look at impacts by location. So this is high tide flooding based on the New London Tide Gauge. And what they consider to be high tide flooding is about 0.5 meter over mean higher high water, which is pretty much talking in Greek. So 0.5 meter is about 1 foot and 9 inches, so 1 3/4 feet. Mean higher high water is the highest tide level at any given day, measured over a whole bunch of other days to get that number. So think of it as like the highest kind of high tide stage. So this image shows on this axis here annual days with high tide flooding. At the bottom, it has decades. So this right here is 1950, over here is 2020. So all of these teeny tiny little bars that you can barely see are the historical records of how many days had high tide flooding. And you see they're very, very small. And now I will point out this over here is 50, so we're talking about a couple of days a year. The two big colored curves, however, show us the projections for the future. So the red curve shows us a high emissions pathway. So that means if globally we don't decrease our emissions significantly, this is the pathway we're on. The blue one shows us if we do decrease our emissions significantly, what we can expect. So here we are in about 2020. The projections for 2025, based on lower emissions, is about 8 days a year of high tide flooding, higher emissions about 14. If you look at 2050, right, so now we're somewhere over here, the lower emissions projection is 33 days. That's over a month combined, if you can sell it all those days, of high tide flooding. It's 156 days as a projection under the high emissions scenario. 2090 is outside of really the scale of what we're looking at for the focus of the project. We're mostly looking at risk up to 2050, but we're keeping an eye to these projections further out. Also knowing that the more distant projections, right, there's a bit more uncertainty, and that as time continues and as we get more and better information, those projections will tighten up. But right now, the projections for 2090 is that under high emissions pathways, we'd be looking at high tide flooding just about every single day. So this is clearly something very significant that we have to plan for. And we've had a couple of users on our interactive website. We have a map where you can actually go in there and put pins, and we encourage you to show us where it floods. You can upload photos, you can describe it to us. And there was a user who put a number of pins along Gravel Street and was saying every high tide we have flooding on the road here. So we understand that this is already an issue that Mystic is dealing with. It's an issue that unfortunately is going to be getting worse. In addition to all of this sort of like coastal flooding hazards, we're also looking at the impact of precipitation, so rainfall and snowfall, and how that impacts flooding. So this graphic is from, I believe actually from 2014, but it shows between 1958 and 2012, the change in the amount of precipitation falling in very heavy events. So essentially it's showing us the change in those really big, the rain bombs, the really, really big storms. And you can see here, the Northeast, we're seeing a huge upward trend in the amount of rainfall coming in these really big events. This matches research that Circa has done that has said, I think it was since 1980, the amount of precipitation we're receiving in the state is going up, but the number of wet days is going down. So that tells us that the days that it does rain, we're getting much more rainfall at a time. And so again, most of our built environment, those systems might be decades old. They were not necessarily designed with these kinds of conditions in mind. So that's something else we're going to be looking at. We also want to take a look at heat. Heat is not just a hazard for the western half of the United States. So this first graph is average daily maximum temperature in degrees Fahrenheit for New London County. So again, I'll walk you through the different variables here. This is the historic record. So this is average daily maximum temperature from 1950 all the way through present day. Again, the red blob shows high emissions pathways. The red line in the middle is the average, and then the top and the bottom of the blob, right, scientific term, shows the range. Blue, again, is for the low emissions pathway. So between 1961 and 1990, average daily maximum temperature was about 60 degrees in New London County. By the end of the 2020s, that average is expected to go up to about 62. In 2050, the average projection for the low and high emissions scenarios are 64 and 65 degrees respectively. And by 2090, we're getting up to 65 and 69 degrees. And again, that's the average line. That's not values up here, no more is it values down here, it's the average. But even with the averages, we're seeing significant differences between what we observed from 1961 to 1990 versus what we're projected to be moving towards. And so with heat, it's also really important to look at those more extreme conditions. So this is a similar chart, but this is days with maximum temperature more than 90 degrees. So those really hot days. Historically, in this county, we had about 4 of those days a year. The balance of this decade tells us we're probably going to experience more like 9. In 2050s, we're going up to about 15 and 21. And by the 2090s, we're getting into somewhere between maybe 21 and 54 days. So a really big increase in the number of days with that, really tough heat. But heat isn't just about the temperature, Frank. Heat is also about humidity. And since the 1970s, humidity has also increased, I think globally by about 3.5%. So with climate change, humidity is going up. That's also feeding into what we talked about, rainfall and incidence of storms. And it's also impacting how heat affects us. So heat index is a combination of heat and humidity. And so that's really how a temperature feels. The hottest months here are July and August. That's no surprise. And humidity in those months tends to be about 71 to 73%. So if you look at this chart from NOAA, this column, sorry, it's too far away. My hand's too shaky. This is 90 degrees. And this is 70% humidity, this is 75. So I put a purple circle around where we are for heat index. So at 90 degrees with those humidities, your experience of a heat index of like 105 to 109 degrees. The chart at the bottom gives you the classification of what that means. So orange is danger. And in that orange zone, heat cramps and heat exhaustion are likely, but heat stroke is also possible with prolonged exposure or physical activity. So that, of course, raises a whole host of questions for a project like this. We have a lot of people who work outside who are going to be experiencing this type of heat. We have a lot of homes that were not built with cooling systems because they previously didn't need them. We have a huge number of tourists that come to downtown Mystic, and they walk the sidewalks and they go from business to business. But how are we going to try to raise awareness about the impacts that heat are going to have on people spending time outside or even in their homes? I'm not going to ask you to do the poll again. We're going to raise some hands. And we're going to have a group discussion about these kind of impacts in Mystic, but we just wanted to get kind of like a quick feel of the room with a couple of poll questions. Wayne, could you bring them up on the screen? Please and thank you. Oh no. Put you on the spot. I can never remember my passwords. Yes, please. Okay, so the question, and we're going to raise hands, and you can raise your hand more than once, is asking you about your experience with issues related to the following hazards that I'll read out. So please raise your hand if you feel like you've experienced storm surge causing flooding during storms in downtown Mystic. Okay, so about a third to a half of the room. Sea level rise causing high tide flooding or other nuisance flooding. So again, more than half the room on that one. Increasing rainfall depths and intensity causing flooding during heavy rainstorms. Again, I'd say most folks in the room. Increasing temperatures causing or worsening health issues or limiting activities. Okay, a couple of hands up. I think we have one more question. Okay, has anyone actually had an event they were going to attend canceled or other recreational activities impacted due to heat? One. Okay. New or worsening wear or tear on property, buildings, and other sensitive equipments. Okay. Anyone feeling like they feel a connection between new or worsening health issues and heat? Okay, a couple of folks for sure. Okay. Okay. Well, we could just go back to the slides. Yeah. Okay, so now that we've talked about the types of impacts that we're going to be studying as part of this project, I want to explain the project approach. So there's really two main components of what we're going to be doing here. The first is a vulnerability assessment of the study area, and then the second is trying to figure out what we do about those vulnerabilities. And Sam's going to talk about this in more detail, so just really wanted to briefly explain the vulnerability assessment is going to consist of a couple of different things, including a field survey that Sam's going to be talking about, a desktop analysis that GZA is going to do looking at geospatial layers of everything from flood zones to critical infrastructure to socioeconomic factors, to soils and topography and all of those sorts of things, as well as the climate layers we just looked at together and others as well. And your community input today is going to really help directly inform our understanding of the area's vulnerability. And then the second part is, again, once we understand the vulnerability of the area a bit better, how can we put together recommendations that the town can take, that individual property owners could take to try to increase their resilience to these hazards. To give you an idea of where we are in the process, we're really still in the beginning stages. GZA is going to be doing field surveys in the next couple of months, hopefully wrapping by the end of the year. They're going to continue doing their mapping work December through February, And then I think by that point, we'll have a pretty good understanding of the area's vulnerabilities, and we'll be doing a second public meeting to report that out. And again, to run it all by you who live and work in this location. The draft report will be prepared in the summer, and there will be a third public meeting to kind of report out on that report and what its contents will be and any like last minute adjustments that we need to make, with the project concluding hopefully in early fall of 2023. You are always welcome to reach out to me. I encourage you, please reach out to me if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have inputs. I'm happy to give you my card. My information's also on our greatergroton.com site. So this is the website we have for the project that I mentioned earlier. If you go to greatergroton.com, you look for the rectangle that looks like this. And that's where we're going to be posting meeting recordings, materials as we develop them. There's also the interactive flood mapper that I mentioned, and there's a survey, some survey questions that people can use to give us information, again, about their experiences. And at the end of the day, we are working towards developing an actionable plan with identified recommendations for projects that will improve Mystic's resiliency. This project is also going to help us gain an understanding of the economic impact of sea level rise on the study area. GZA, through all of their mapping work and their field surveys, is developing an inventory of vulnerable infrastructure and natural resources. And just as important as all of these things is the community dialogue that we're having through meetings like this, hearing from you about the issues and talking about possible interventions. So with that, we're going to break into small group discussions. We have some kind of like guiding questions, but before we do that, does anyone have any clarification questions? We'll have some time at the end for Q&A, but if there's anything I said that you're just like, hold on, Megan, I really didn't follow that, or you know, any kind of big, Frank.
The flood mapper you referred to in that last slide.
Yeah.
Is what? It's on.
It's on Greater Groton.
Thank you.
Yep. Zell.
You use the word infrastructure.
Mhm.
What does that include? Does that include houses and commercial buildings as well as things like sewer?
Correct. Yep. Utility systems,
Roadways.
streets, roadways, culverts,
everything.
bridges.
The
Yeah.
bridge, sidewalks.
And one clarification, it's all publicly available data, so we'll be collecting some limited data when we do field surveys, and I'll get to that in the next steps after the discussion, but I'd say over 95% of the data is just what's publicly available that the town can provide, and other data from Connecticut GIS.
Will this include a historic record as well as what's happened here in the past? I'm thinking particularly of the 1938 hurricane and what that impact had on the community.
The short answer is yes. We'll be documenting the historical events that have impacted this area. And the 38 is obviously, you know, the storm of record for many of you who are familiar with those events.
Sorry, one more question.
And you're cut off.
And I don't get cut off. And how will this be coordinated with Stonington?
Yeah, well, we're excited that we have a couple of folks from Stonington here today, including Tom Norris. And Stonington has already done similar type planning, right? So I'm really hoping that this project will allow us to then better coordinate with Stonington on things that we can be doing maybe even in concert moving forward.
And we've been in contact with their planning department and their staff over at Town Hall. They're aware of this project. Their planning director actually worked in Groton for about 15 years. So we have really good communication between the two municipalities. But this project is focused solely on the Groton side of the bridge, the Groton Mystic side.
Do you know, has Stonington hired a Megan for their side of the? No.
They don't know. No, they don't have a Megan yet. Not yet.
Are you able to utilize any data that they collected when they did their resiliency plan that will help with your plans?
That's a great question. I mean, we can certainly reach out to them and do a little cross comparison and see if there's any gaps, because we've already put together sort of our master list of all of the different data layers we plan to use. So it would be good timing to compare and see if there's anything that they utilize that wasn't on our list.
Yeah, and I think that would primarily probably be just the state data. At GZA, we've done several of these throughout Connecticut, but we always evaluate neighboring communities to identify, when we're doing that initial kind of data assessment, so we'll be looking more at the climate adaptation plan that Stonington's developed. But the local data is largely the town of Groton's data. But it'll be primarily probably the state and then any federal sources. But we've got a good handle on what those are already, but we'll do a gap analysis to see if we're missing anything.
Did you have a question?
Missing the bridge?
Yeah, I mean, the bridge is infrastructure that certainly on the Groton side will be part of the footprint of the study and factored in.
We'll be looking at that, and the Connecticut Department of Transportation has data on that, and if we can get, deck elevations, a lot of that would be what the top of the deck would be in relation to the existing flood elevations that Megan was referring to, the 1% annual recurrence flood, which is the kind of regulatory marker that FEMA has that drives a lot of your building regulations with the town and the state of Connecticut. But we'll definitely be looking at that, because I know during high tide you can see that water. It's probably at a different, higher location than it was several years ago. And that was a good point. The maps that Megan had, just one clarification, the map on the left with the 20 inches was just like the mean high water, so it didn't have any wave action in it. And the one on the right had wave action of up to 3 feet of waves. And in some areas over 3 feet, and then some areas between 1.5 and 3 feet. I don't want to get into too much of the details, so that'll be included later in more written format.
Okay, one last one.
Yeah, I have to ask. So will the final actionable plan also include potential structural solutions to the issues that you've laid out?
Yes. I mean, not developed extensively, right? But I mean, this plan is going to have actionable recommendations of targeted projects that need to be done. In the back.
I had assumed I was going to ask that question. I was wondering if maybe you've already said it, but the timetable for the completion of the study?
Yeah, we're targeting to have the entire thing wrapped up by fall of next year. So in about a year.
And at that point, we will have these actionable items?
Correct.
Has the town committed to acting on those items that may come up out of the study?
Not yet, so that's another, if any of you have been, watching and paying attention to what happens in town government, town council, often town council, RTM wants to hear from you, the people. So some of this is, we're not only analyzing this information, but we're also trying to get public input on this. We want to have a very open, very transparent process, so that once, and it's not just this meeting, after this meeting, as Megan said, up on our Greater Groton website, if you haven't visited that site yet, please check it out. Not only this initiative, but there's a lot of other initiatives that we're working on right now. There'll be survey questions. There'll be a lot of other ways for people to input and interact that can't attend a meeting. And we'll be getting public input throughout this entire process. So then once we have that final plan, we can take that to the town council, to the RTM, talk to them about the financial needs that we have, working with Public Works, with Parks and Rec, our other town departments, look at capital improvement projects and how we can budget those over years. Again, talking to the council, there'll be further debate on that, and with the RTM. Right now, there's also a lot of grant money out there for these types of projects, so hopefully we can match some town funds with that. So the short answer is no. We don't have money committed to these future projects yet, because we don't entirely know what they are. We haven't designed them, and we don't know what the cost of those are. But I think that's something, we can help inform, but we need all of you to be a unified voice about, hey, this is something we have to address sooner than later, once we end this project. So it's not just, hey, we did the plan, we came up with the plan, great, we're all done. This is the easy part, coming up with the money, designing it, and building it. That's the hard part. So.
Okay, so, oh, sorry, one last question?
One more question.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that storm surges magnify as it goes up the river. How are you coordinating whether there's buffer zones with Stonington and how you address that? It would seem to be that a necessary kind of coordination point.
Yeah, and I think once we get into the planning process, it will help us have more informed discussions with Stonington. Dr. Jim O'Donnell, who's on our steering committee, is also involved with a research project they're doing over by the Mystic Aquarium. So that will give us really great information we can fold into all of this and help foster that larger conversation.
Right.
Yep.
The model that was developed at Circa, I'm over there, has been improved in terms of small area for the Mystic River. So that's a new model. So it could be, you take a look at that surge mapper, we could actually have a surge mapper for the Mystic River, and it's better.
Fantastic, yeah.
While I have the floor for a second, I want you to think a little outside the box when you think about impacts. You know, you heard about easy impacts. I had a strange one this afternoon. I happened to go into the Army-Navy store, I call it the Army-Navy store downtown, to see if they'd heard about the meeting and all. And I said, you ever bothered with flooding, because it all looks pretty low grade? Oh yeah, just last September, we had a rainfall event, and the water was 6 feet up on my floor here because of vehicular wakes. The cars driving through the water on the street. It wasn't all that high, but produced a wave. Wayne talked about waves out there. I said, I'll be damned, it's something you never really think about, but with all of our four-wheel drives, high suspension trucks and the rest these days, maybe getting a wake from vehicles is more common than it would be 30 years ago when we were kids around here. So that's, I thought it was a little outside the box.
Okay, fantastic. Sorry, we were just figuring out last second logistics. So we have some discussion questions that we're going to break you up into small groups to work on. And I think, honestly, folks working at tables, if you could discuss amongst each table. Folks in the back, if you want to chat in your rows, feel free to move the chairs. We have an empty table up front. And Sam's going to be passing out some worksheets. There's also easels if someone feels the need, they want to get a marker out and put things on easels. Writing down some notes is very much appreciated because then we can take that back, right? We can't listen to every comment in the conversation. So if you can make sure to jot down you think the most important parts for us to hear, that would be great. And for timing, maybe...
So we have, just real quick, we have kind of 3 different topics. The first is flooding, which will probably take, I'd say, maybe 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes. And then we have heat-related questions, which will probably be about 7 to 10 minutes. And then we have kind of discussion questions, which will that tie into more of the impacts as it relates to both of those types of hazards. And that'll be kind of the capstone discussion. That'll probably be more like, 5 to 8 minutes, just because there's only a few questions. And what we've done is I've got 20 of these, so we need some note takers at each table, and then so I would just suggest having a couple people at each of the groups. It looks like we have about 40 people here. The folks want to use the easels.
Or you can just
Or-
write
or-
on the paper, we'll
the
pass out
paper.
the paper and the pen, and then maybe if
Yeah.
at the end we can just talk about it a little bit
Yeah,
in a
exactly.
bigger group session. Yeah, let's just do that. So let's
Okay.
pass those out. Okay, give me some to pass out.
So this is
All right. So this is one small group here.
Nice to meet you. Maybe like more for your.
These are more the questions. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, if I can get everybody's attention, please.
Get everybody's attention again.
We're gonna do a quick 20 kind of 20-second report out for each group, just one key thought that came out from your table as it related to each of these discussions.
So I'm going to walk around with the mic just so we have for recording purposes. If people don't want to report out, so again, as Sam said, about 20 seconds. If there was one topic or one thing that your group really discussed in detail or felt strongly about, give me 20 seconds.
Responsible development, not putting people in harm's way with new buildings, and making more permeable surfaces for parking lots and that kind of thing.
Excellent, thank you. From this group.
Well, we had controlling water that might have to be controlled outside of downtown Mystic, rain gardens and retention of wetlands, farther out, and the concept of retaining an inch of water in the storm before you discharge, if rain flooding's the issue.
Okay, thank you. Somebody from this table? Larry?
Yeah, a couple of points. One is that we didn't think that heat should be the priority against some of the other issues. And I won't go into all the reasons why. The other one is that this needs to be just phase one, that there's additional surrounding areas outside of what was presented that really have similar problems, right? That need to be addressed and the problems there. The third one, I think, is we talked about the economic impacts. There's a lot of things you can do that would cost enormous amount of money. How do we get it down to the actions which are affordable versus things that are, gee, we'd like to do? And that in terms of trying to manage the results or the output of the recommendations, it really has to be affordable. And to that point, if 10, 11% we think of the population are in those areas, if you count up everything, not just what you had, that says 90% of the rest of the town says, I'm going to pay for that 10%. So there needs to be an economic perspective that says we all get hurt, even if we're not on the parcel that's immediately affected by water.
Thanks, I'll take that. Thank you, Larry. Somebody from this table?
I think one of the important issues, very important issue, is that cooperation among towns and communities. 3 of us at this table have just been appointed to a flood control commission in Stonington, and we have a mutual interest in what happens in Groton because of one side of the river and the other. And I think we need to work together, and we look forward to doing that.
Thank you. And again, we'll just try to keep these like 30 seconds, 20 seconds ideally. Somebody from this table?
So we had a lot of similar things that they had said at table 4 over there about the cost and how would you do that. But one of the other things is why would we not take what others have done already? There's a lot of places that are already dealing with this and have mitigated. So are we looking at whatever they might have done already and what did they do? And then the other thing is about insurance. You hear that. Flood insurance is almost impossible. So how do we mitigate that?
Thank you. Good. Yeah. Here, somebody from this group? Oh, there you go.
Do I take it?
Okay.
All right. We were actually talking right down John's street here, land use policy. I know everybody really likes to get single-family homes around here, but really multifamily developments make better use of the areas and leave more open space. And we really want to increase the amount of porous surfaces so that water doesn't run off. Thank you.
This group back here.
Echo a lot of the ideas that everyone said. It's also great to just see all the great ideas and engagement. Definitely second the idea of working with sort of the river basin engagement across the town and both sides, and interesting from different levels as well as communities, local, national. Our partners in this were telling us about their house that was just lost in Fort Myers. So it's everywhere. The same kind of a storm could hit here, and looking at both the big sides of it and the small sides of it. So it's great to start right here.
Thank you. I think I forgot this table right up here. Did I get somebody from this table? Yep. Okay. This group back here. Come on, somebody.
I don't really have anything to contribute.
I just want to make a comment about cost. This
issue is rising higher up in government. So I think we could see help from the federal government and others. So I wouldn't rule out cost yet.
All right, well, thank you, everybody, for your feedback on this. We're going to take, if you didn't give us your written results, please do give those to us. We'll compile all that information, and we'll get these questions out on Greater Groton also. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to Sam. He's going to talk for about 5 to 7 minutes. We'll have a few more minutes for questions. We want to wrap up at 6:30, but we'll all be hanging around if people have questions or want to chat.
Oh. Thank you, John, and thank you all for your great participation. This was outstanding. So what I'm going to do is go over some examples. It was nice to hear a lot of the feedback, and I'm not going to be able to answer all of your questions, but I'm actually going to be able to address some of them in what we go over. Starting off with kind of example strategies and actions, so we're not just starting with a blank sheet of paper here. We're kind of looking at it from a couple of key strategies. We're looking at protect and accommodate. Protect means we're going to be staying here and we're going to be building flood protection, like increasing the height of seawalls, other areas. Accommodate means we're going to be staying here and we're going to be adapting existing structures to the floodwater. So I'm going to show some examples of those in the following slides. But within both of these strategies, we have kind of 3 key actions. We have structural, and that was kind of brought up earlier, looking at improvements to stormwater infrastructure, improvements to coastal structures, using your natural landscapes to help support nature-based actions. We have non-structural. So what does that mean? That means integrating existing policies, plans, and programs, integrating this into existing policies and plans and programs, going back and also integrating existing plans and programs into this process as well, because we need to not only identify technically feasible, but we also need to identify actions that can be built based on your existing building codes, zoning, et cetera. Integrated projects, so it's not really, we're not just going to do one or the other. We're going to be trying to look at this holistically from your lifeline systems, which include stormwater, wastewater, transportation systems. Also looking at support in vulnerable populations. We'll also be looking at historic structures. It was brought up earlier. Mystic is a very important town historically. There are lots of historic structures, so that will be a big piece of this. And to the right here is an example of a protect strategy in Stratford, Connecticut, that's been very successful so far. There's about 18 to 20 protect actions that were identified, of which I'd say about 4 to 5 are already in engineering and design, and a couple of them have actually gotten federal funds for projects up to about $8 million for major flood protection. Looking at kind of some other examples here, a lot of these are going to be based on national kind of examples, FEMA examples. So we're going to be looking at drainage upgrades. Your existing stormwater, it wasn't all developed at one time. The design flood for the stormwater probably was not a 1% annual flood, right? You may be lucky if it was like a 10% annual flood. We'll be looking at elevating structures as an option. You have some structures already on piers, that type. And then elevating utilities as well. And you can see these are some examples here. Up to the right is a new bridge that had kind of an upsize. That's at high tide to help improve drainage. And then there are examples you can see of the elevation on the bottom where structures are elevated. Some are not. The ones that are going to be more resilient. So natural nature-based solutions are going to also be a key part of this. You can see here, we're looking at rain gardens. We also have a couple examples here of, this is kind of a beach restoration type examples. These are kind of applicable examples that we've evaluated already that could really be a part of this project. Tree trenches, green streets, we have a lot of pavement. You can even look at this back parking lot, right? I know they've actually had flooding into this building as a result of intense precipitation. And then flood barriers. So one thing I just wanted to point out was we're going to be looking at community actions with a big umbrella. What can the town do? Also in coordination with neighboring, with Stonington, but also what can property owners do? So as property owners, there's examples that we're going to look at of temporary and permanent solutions that you could do in the near term that could help, provide protection. You can see here, this is kind of a fire department where you have floodgates that can help in the more of a shorter term solution. This right here is actually more of a longer term solution. It's more of a flood wall that helped provide protection to a major medical facility. Sample references, I just wanted to show kind of we were looking at national examples. We also have a number of examples from Connecticut communities we've worked in that we'll be applying lessons learned from. But this first one here is kind of the FEMA's natural nature base. It's from 2021. A lot of those examples you saw earlier were from that document. And we try to look at those because that will help position the town in terms of pursuing future federal funding. The middle one is more of a Connecticut-based sustainability and resilience for stormwater improvements, looking at ways to improve your stormwater infrastructure. And then this last one is kind of looking at what I was talking about before, that second umbrella of kind of actions that can help educate property owners on that you can actually take on, and also we'll be identifying areas for potential funding that private property owners can look for. I'm almost out of time, but our next steps, I'm not going to get into great detail on the vulnerability assessment because it can get very complicated with lots of data sources, but right now we're in line to be doing some field surveys of downtown properties, and we're going to be looking at properties that are located within the FEMA special flood hazard area because that's kind of the guide that FEMA, the last guide that I showed you on the right on the previous slide. We're using a checklist from FEMA, and it's really important to kind of use existing standards. And that's the one that we've actually created a template already. We're going to be completing the assets and hazard inventories. We've got a lot of that. We're probably about 80 to 90% done with the data collection, and that'll be integrated into a comprehensive shapefile that will be used. The vulnerability assessment will be looking at current flooding based on FEMA's flood insurance rate maps. We'll be looking at CIRCA's sea level rise viewer, but we'll also look at some NOAA data and Army Corps data just to have a comparison to see how those compare. And a lot of times the future projections are pretty similar. And then we'll be preparing the asset and hazard mapping. That's really going to show you the visualizations of exposure, what properties are going to be impacted today, and then 2050. And if we're able to, we'll look further out to 2070, but the town's only required, as Megan noted earlier, to look out to 2050 for those 20 inches. And then we'll be doing that second workshop. I'm going to end on this note here at the field visits. We're going to be coordinating with downtown tenants and property owners with kind of a marketing blast to let folks know when GZA staff will be in the field, and really we're going to be using it based, this form here that we've created is based on FEMA guidance, and then we're really looking at collecting information that's not included in the assessor's data. And with that, I want to thank everyone for coming this evening. We've got about 2 to 3 minutes, I think, for questions. We can make it longer if people want to, but with that, I'd like to open the floor to any questions that folks have.
One of the questions is the flood insurance rate maps from FEMA put in flood zones, 100-year storms. You mentioned building codes say build to this, but is that accommodating the 20-inch rise? You know, we could build our house today to meet the code, and then in less than 25 years, we're going to have a problem.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So when So when we look at the FEMA's, what's called the base flood elevation, and that is pretty much the 1%, that's just what that's what your regulatory, that's what the building code is based on. But when we're looking into the future, when we look at the base flood elevation, we're adding the 20 inches on top of that. So for example, if you have a 10-foot base flood elevation, and this is all commonly applied, and it's something Circa has advanced as well, but that's the number we're using that we'll be adding on to look at other elevations with respect to the downtown.
Probably a premature question, but what steps are you taking to make sure we're not moving the problem somewhere else? Let's just say we solve it here. Are you moving the problem somewhere else? Is there a scope of area where if we do this, this is now an impact?
That's a very, very good question. So pretty much when you are developing flood protection projects, you're required to do an analysis that, like a modeling analysis that demonstrates that it's not going to result in increased flooding elsewhere. But so a lot of times we'll be including that as a part of the recommendations for consideration. So, the building code's not going to let you, in the state of Connecticut, I can guarantee you, based on deep regulations, they're not going to let the town create flood protection that's going to make it worse than Stonington, for example. And we keep a keen eye to make recommendations that will avoid to the best that you can those actions. But at the end of the day, once you get into the final project implementation, you'll have to do modeling to verify that you're not resulting in flooding elsewhere. And that's pretty standard practice for that type of consideration. So that was a good point to bring up.
Anyone else? If not, please, on your way out, sign in on the sign-in sheet so we have your information. We can include you on any updates on the project. If anybody has any of the sheets left with some information filled out, please hand that to Wayne. Just raise your hand up now. He'll come around and collect it. And thank you very much for your time. This is meeting 1. There'll be 2 more. And have a great night, everybody. Also, it is dark outside, so just watch your step leaving the building.